In 1968, Dan Corcoran was working as a chaplain's assistant during his time in the Navy in the Vietnam War. One night, while visiting an outpost with many mortally wounded soldiers, the chaplain told Corcoran to simply talk with them and to just listen. But one soldier, a Marine who was clearly not going to make it, asked Corcoran to scribe a letter to his mother. The Marine, with severe head wounds, dictated his last goodbye, and Corcoran, who had never learned to read or write, could only make some lines along the page. The Marine passed, and Dan Corcoran crumpled up the paper. This is a true story that was included in an episode of APM Report's 2022 podcast, Sold a Story. This podcast investigated how many teachers across the USA have been trained to teach reading using a disproven theory. It's a good podcast, but I'll never forget the Corcoran story. Dan Corcoran's story is an example of complete literacy absence. Picture a globe where literacy and the experiences it grants us form a vertical axis. This story would belong somewhere near the South Pole. Very low literacy, a very low experience. As Dan Corcoran said,
that just that messed me up for quite a while.
And his story is also the perfect example of what illiteracy can do. Lock someone out from worlds beyond their own. He needed access to the Marine's world, to the Marine's family, so that he could give this last goodbye to a heartbroken mother. The only key Dan Corcoran needed to get into this world was literacy. So, if this story sits at the South Pole of the literacy and experience spectrum, what lives up north? High literacy, a very positive experience. What happens when literacy is a success and it can connect people to worlds outside their own instead of locking them out? This question felt like the heart of a brand new edutainment show in 1983.
Butterfly in the sky, I can go twice as high. Take a look.
Reading Rainbow debuted in 1983, but you didn't have to be an 80s kid to appreciate it. It was a PBS staple for well over 2 decades, officially ending in November 2006, with reruns airing until 2009. For decades, this show gave kids a glimpse into what it meant to belong to a world of books. But I don't think the impact of this show became clear to kids until they grew into adults and fondly reminisced on all the good that came from this show. And I mean fondly. In 2014, a Kickstarter crowdfunded $1 million over the course of 11 hours and $5.4 million in just a few days for the cause of getting the series back up again. The revival didn't work out due to legal disputes, though after the 2006 cancellation, there would be different iterations of Reading Rainbow stuff, like an app and a live Zoom show without LeVar, and these just weren't the same. But just earlier this month, we did get the full-blown reboot that so many have hoped for. It stars Michael the Librarian, and so far it seems like we're off to a great start. The host seems very sweet, and the show itself seems to carry that same inclusive spirit and wholesome goal of promoting literacy to kids everywhere. But I have to tell you, I'm nervous. Not about the show itself, but I'm nervous about how it will land with society today. The world Reading Rainbow is returning to is not the same one it left behind. The original Reading Rainbow ended long before the culture war as we know it truly ramped up. Everything about the show used to feel accepted as nonpartisan, as wholesome and agreeable. Its message that literacy is good, that literacy can open up doors to worlds outside of our own, was uncontroversial, but even that kind of message gets attacked today. That's why I'm scared the show won't get the same nationwide embrace that it once did. Then again, maybe this reboot can test the waters. Maybe it can show us what society still has space for in a positive way. Can we still encourage literacy with sincerity and inclusivity? Today, I want to talk about the big challenges that this show is walking into and why the odds might be stacked against it to live on in the spirit it was originally made in. First, let's explore the history of the classic version. Reading Rainbow was an edutainment show hosted by Star Trek actor LeVar Burton. Every episode featured a children's picture book, which was usually read aloud by a celebrity. Notable celebrity appearances included Jane Goodall, Al Roker, and Kermit the Frog. The rest of the episode would center around a theme or topic from the featured book, with LeVar doing various related activities or visiting different places. Toward the end of the episode, LeVar would introduce a recommendation section, letting viewers at home know of some great books they could ask about at their own local libraries. And while LeVar liked these books, he was also respectful of others' viewpoints, leading into the recommendation section with his catchphrase.
But you don't have to take my word for it.
Reading Rainbow was always difficult to fund for a variety of reasons, including but not limited to these two big ones. Number one, it was expensive to secure licensing in order to read the books out loud on television. And number two, other PBS shows like Sesame Street had marketable characters who could secure major outside funding through merchandise sales. Reading Rainbow had no real characters or merchandising potential and was mostly funded through grants and donations made possible by viewers like you.
Thank you.
One of the most substantial funding sources was the Ready to Learn grant, which was made for TV programming that encouraged early childhood learning. But in 2005, under the No Child Left Behind Act, the grant saw a much tighter focus, developing the hard skills of reading, like phonics or spelling, not on things like celebrating the joy of reading. LeVar Burton has not been shy about mentioning the Act's role in the ultimate cancellation of the program.
The emphasis was on, under No Child Left Behind, was on teaching kids how to read and not foster. There was no money in the budget, essentially, for fostering a love of reading, as crazy as that sounds.
Nevertheless, throughout its run, it earned more than 200 broadcast awards, 26 of which were Emmys. But there's a lot more to say about this show beyond what you can find on Wikipedia. Reading Rainbow inspired a lot of real-life good, and this was made possible through caring communities who found inspiration from the show. Just check out archived community newspapers from the 80s and 90s, and you'll find plenty of examples of Reading Rainbow-themed programming in libraries, community centers, and book fairs. For example, one community in Harrisburg brought an episode of the show to life in 1997. A famous local figure read a book about iguanas to the kids, and then the kids got to meet another community member's pet iguanas. It was a hit. The coordinator of the program said she hoped children would make the connection between the story about the iguanas and the exciting activity. These types of community events feel very in keeping with what Reading Rainbow's theme song promised. Take a look in a book and you'll understand something new. And then when you encounter it outside of a text, you'll be able to connect with it. And this process, in fact, can take you anywhere. Sounds great. So why isn't it so easy for the show to swoop in 2025 and take us back to its original benevolent spirit? Let's talk about how the world has changed for media and children's media in the past 20 years. The first reason that I fear this show won't get the warm reception that it deserves is the current landscape of adults making children's content political for their own gain. I'm thinking it's only a matter of time until this show is used as rage bait. Now, if it is used as rage bait, some might say, oh well, who cares? Grifters are gonna grift. But one of the most special things about this show was the way it called all kids in, was not divisive. And there's something upsetting about the thought of watching it get used as a pawn to call for more division. There's just something difficult about the thought of the adults overriding the show's true intentions to get some clicks. There are so many examples today of adults spoiling kids' entertainment in exchange for clicks or engagement.
By the way, for all you kids watching at home, Santa just is white.
But I'm going to talk about just one example. An example that occurred about halfway between Reading Rainbow's original ending and today. I want to talk about this example in particular because it has two very important features of children's entertainment-themed rage bait. It's also from 2017. Maybe this wasn't the first piece of its kind, but it was the first time I truly noticed this trend of spoiling kids' content because of disgruntled adults and their politics becoming so commonplace. And it's just spiraled out of control since. Anyway, in 2017, I stumbled across this opinion piece called Hijab Barbie, perfect Christmas gift for non-Muslim parents who want to stick it to Trump. So I know I have some doll fans in the crowd, hey, but for the uninitiated, it's not unusual for Mattel to make Barbies after famous female athletes like Mary Fowler, Jade Carey, Jordan Childs, Ilona Maher, Venus Williams, and many more. In 2017, Mattel introduced a Barbie modeled around Olympic fencer Ibtihaj Mohammed, who is, a person. But this whole article refers to her as Hijab Barbie, and it basically goes on to say that this could only ever be made for the purpose of spiting Trump. They said that this is so obviously political because if it weren't, we would also see evangelical Barbie wearing a cross. But again, this doll is modeled after a person, and this is just a recreation of how she looked on the day she earned an Olympic medal for our country. A medal that is mentioned nowhere in this piece. Interestingly, there is a very openly devout Christian Olympian, albeit not evangelical, who was also made into a doll, not by Barbie, but nevertheless by Mattel for the American Girl franchise. And that's Katie Ledecky. If the cross had been part of what she wore in the Olympics, that very well could have made the cut. But it wasn't, so we'll never know. But I also can't seem to find anything claiming that American Girl's Katie Ledecky doll, a recreation of an openly Christian athlete, was made for political reasons or to spite anyone. For me personally, I admire both of these athletes, and I think they both have every right to speak on or display their faith. But I can't find anything accusing the Katie Ledecky doll's skin color of being part of a political message, unlike in this other piece about the Ibtihaj doll. But dolls are just the tip of the kids' content pissing off the adults' iceberg. Children's books are under way more scrutiny than they were back in the Reading Rainbow era. And even though the Ibtihaj doll opinion piece isn't about books, I bring this story up for a few reasons. Not just because it was such an early iteration of the trend of politicizing nonpartisan messages for kids, not just because this trend has snowballed massively ever since, but there's something else about this opinion piece that has also spiraled out of control in the past 8 years. In 2017, America had reached a shocking and unprecedented level of political polarization. I'm sure I'm not the one breaking the news to you when I say, in many ways, it has only gotten worse. But there's something else, something beyond adults seeing representation in children's content as means to spite political opponents, something else in this opinion piece that's relevant to why Reading Rainbow's magic wouldn't prevail today. It's something that predates 2017, but seemed to really start getting legitimized at this point. And that's getting mad at ordinary people, at fellow everyday humankind in your community about things that didn't happen, things that you picture the people around you possibly doing. This opinion piece says that the person who buys this doll must also be the same kind of person who dresses a baby boy in pink to trick people into a sanctimonious discussion about gender, or perhaps they're the kind of person who makes special effort to go to a mall to buy this doll instead of ordering online so that they can talk to the cashier about social importance. Has there ever been someone who dressed a boy in pink to prove a point? For sure, somewhere, probably at some time. And has there been someone who has chatted up a cashier about social issues? Yes, I was a cashier for years. But this author isn't linking specific examples, and this doesn't sound like something that happened to this author while they were working a cash register. I find it funny how the author of this piece is quite unhappy picturing real-world interactions going wrong, and he's telling us about these scenarios that are just as frustrating as they are imaginary, and we're only hearing about them through the internet. This 2017 piece not only felt like a very early example of adults making kids' stuff weird, but it also felt like an early example of normalizing chronic internet use, out of fear that we'll interact with someone in a less than satisfying way. It felt like a green light to just go ahead and keep up with the increasing abandonment of third places. And the dwindling of third places is the second reason why I'm nervous about the revamp's fate and reception. At the same time, I'm quite excited to see if this new version can rise to this massive challenge of encouraging people to get out more to libraries and third spaces. Because, you see, the real spirit of the original show lived in third places. In libraries where kids asked about books from the show, in community centers that copied the show's format to spread the nonpartisan message that reading is fun and that it opens up new worlds. Reading Rainbow required a certain amount of goodwill to survive, not just from donors and funders of the program who believed in the show's benevolent goals, but also for people to want to bring Reading Rainbow-inspired programming into their communities. It relied on goodwill and had enough of it to survive for nearly 3 decades. I just don't think we have that now. And so this point about not having enough third places is a 2-for-1. We don't have enough third places, but we also don't have enough goodwill. From my point of view, the 2017 opinion piece takes a Mattel tradition of honoring female athletes and talents and makes this tradition, originally meant for the inspiration and enjoyment of kids, and makes it political and not fun. And I have to say, I'm not super interested in giving a ton of empathetic consideration toward this author who hasn't made up his mind about whether part of the upset here is the doll's dark hair, or if the upset is that we can't see the doll's hair. And to be honest, a different female athlete, Simone Biles, comes to mind right now. Someone who might say a piece like this isn't actually about political opinion at all. And I do feel like I'm on the same page as her. But to give the benefit of the doubt for just a moment and to say, okay, fine, we're just talking politics. If we move forward in the conversation by saying, okay, the content creators and influencers and authors criticizing diversity and inclusion are just talking politics, well, then there does seem to be something I have in common with voices like these. They also seem to believe that someone is making kids' stuff political and not fun. It does seem that one area where we might agree is that kids' content is getting spoiled. That means the distrust and cynicism and perceived lack of goodwill is the same among us, but the root is like an optical illusion. I think it's round, they think it's square, and it doesn't matter how well anyone argues their case, we have enough people who have vowed to never, ever change their minds and to stay angry. And one side effect of all this is the policing of children's content. The original Reading Rainbow taught us to earnestly engage in what we were reading, to try to empathize or predict or analyze or think or just learn something new. But when all children's content is about sticking it to the other side, or if it's not, but someone makes it about sticking it to one side, there's no room to engage with sincerity. It was made with an agenda, or at least enough people say that it was, so there's no point sitting around reading the literature seriously. Oddly enough, this idea of hidden or perceived agendas makes me want to talk about CoComelon. Originally, when I tried to answer the question of why this show might not work today, I had a whole section about how Reading Rainbow simply doesn't fit into the children's content landscape with shows like CoComelon. In case you don't know what dopamine machine shows are, well, those are kids' programs with rapidly changing colors and landscapes with no plot or conflict. Kids get a chemical reward from watching it, just from sitting there and getting a new sensory experience every few seconds. They don't have to try to work out conflict or guess at solutions. A lot of adults call this kind of thing brain rot. It's addictive for kids, they don't have to think, they don't think, and they get very upset when it gets turned off. And dopamine machine stuff has a very obvious agenda: money. Who benefits from kids watching a program that makes them less active thinkers, makes them devastated when it gets turned off? Well, not society, but the people who made the program. If a kid is addicted to a specific program, they're going to watch it more and more and more. And voila, more time spent on the show means more ad revenue. It's got an agenda, and it's an obvious one. Lots of parents hate this kind of content, but enough of them allow it so that these kinds of shows are wildly profitable. It's usually easy for adults to spot dopamine machine kids' stuff because of the lack of story, the revolving door of random colors and characters, and usually this ugly animation style. But literally, the same business model is used on so much content for adults, and it goes unrecognized. Grown-up dopamine machines give people dopamine in the form of what they think is righteous anger, of thank God I'm better than those people. Thank God I would never buy hijab Barbie like all these people out there who, and no, don't ask me for their names, who are buying it only to spite my party. Part of the dopamine machine is to not ask questions. Like, didn't Ibtihaj earn an Olympic medal? Doesn't Mattel often honor female medalists? I just don't think it will take long for someone to get offended by the representation in a book featured on the show, and to then go on to make a podcast about how the show is political and therefore something to be righteously angry about. And this takes me back to the third major challenge that I think the show faces. It's about that axis from the beginning. My axis was about literacy and experience together. Dan Corcoran's story sat at the bottom of the poll. Low literacy, a painful, life-defining, low experience. If I heard this story as a kid, I know what I would be thinking. We have to help as many people as possible climb up from here. Dan Corcoran did not deserve to go through this. No one does. Everyone deserves to be up top. High literacy, high experience. The third major challenge that I think the show faces is that too many people erroneously believe they have found the inverse to be true. Too many people are receiving the illusion of high experiences received from media engagement requiring low literacy skills. When we consume content that doesn't challenge us, that doesn't tap into the literacy skills that Reading Rainbow wanted to normalize, there's this very ugly transaction happening here. Allegiance and blind loyalty and not asking questions in exchange for dopamine. Reading Rainbow's transaction used to be careful consideration when interpreting a text in exchange for skill. And heck, on Reading Rainbow, even the host encouraged kids at home to consider not liking some of the books, because
You don't have to
reading a
take my
book
word
and
for it.
recognizing it's not your cup of tea, or that it doesn't come easy to you, or that it's a different kind of book from what you've read before, that's a skill, and that process brings value. While we continue to get dopamine hits from the internet, from self-righteous podcasters, or wherever, the Faustian bargain, of course, is that these feel-good moments only get you so far. Dopamine depletes fast, and your brain begs you for more when it's gone, so you'll have to seek it out, and someday your regular dopamine source just won't be enough. And meanwhile, you will have convinced yourself that people in the real world aren't your friends because they might dress a baby boy in pink or buy a doll made in the image of an American of a religion that's different from your own. Today, I just can't picture a world where reading Rainbow will go on without controversy. And I know, controversy is not the end of the world. It can be okay. I get all that. But there's something about a show built on the earnest goodwill of the people, the once united people, getting suddenly torched for its same teachings, that's really tough to swallow. And that's why I hope the new host and the show itself can weather today's storm and can still reach kids with the joy of reading that it was always meant to share. While this video may have felt like a downer at times, I would like to lift things up a bit, to bring back some of that Reading Rainbow spirit right here, right now. In the comments, please share something that's opened up a new world for you. It could be a book, a story, even a new show or film, something that's broadened your perspective and immersed you in a new world. Just write about it in the comments below. I'm going to add some of my own, and these are worlds I've found interesting.
But you don't have to take my word for it.
Thanks for being here. And if you want to join me in exploring more stories like this one, please subscribe.